Okay, this is an orientation video for the March Virtual Apprenticeship Challenge, in which I just want to talk about your axing setup. So I think it's really useful to have a stump that's made out of softwood, because then over time you develop this lovely pitted surface. And that pitted surface is really important because when you're axing, you're almost always jamming the piece of wood at an angle into the stump. And if you have a smooth stump, it's going to skitter out from underneath, and that could happen right as the axe was coming down, so you'd end up hitting your hand. So having this rough pitted surface is really important, and a softwood stump does that better than a hardwood stump. Whatever stump you have, the very first time before you use it, spend some time with your axe chipping a little indentation into the surface to be the beginning of that roughed out bit. And I also find you can see this big knot here. I find it's helpful, whatever is part of the stump is facing away from you, if you line that up with a knot, it helps the stump keep from splitting over time, because when you whack the axe into the stump again and again and again, it sends a shockwave, a tiny shockwave, but a shockwave through the stump, and it will eventually split the stump completely in half. I like a stump that's up on legs because it saves your back, but my stump, if I get myself down to full depth here, the wood chips, my stump comes up to the top of my thighs, so it's not crazy high, and that allows me to work on long cooking spoons without having my hand be up too high, and shorter spoons without having to bend over too low. I don't have a stump my stump doesn't have any cutouts or special notches in it, but I do use the different parts of the stump to support the spoon as I'm working. You'll also notice that the axe is always sunk into the stump when I'm not using it. You'll see a lot of carvers leave their axes like this when they're not using it, and I think that that's super dangerous, because all you need to do is bang it with your knee and have it fall off onto your foot, and it goes right through your shoe, and the next thing you know, you have a hospital visit. So my rule of thumb is always, always, always put the axe into the stump nice and firm whenever you're not using it. And that keeps you safe, it keeps anyone who might be walking by safe, and for me is a cardinal rule. I also keep out here on a bench that's right over here my saw, and the thing that's important to say about this saw is that it has a straight edge to the teeth. A lot of these pruning saws have a curve to them because it helps make them more aggressive if you're cutting straight through a limb. But the way we use them, where at least part of the time you're using them to do stop cuts where you want the blade to be straight up and down, if there's a curve to it, it'll cut further in the back than in the front. And so since you can't see the back, you are prone to over-cutting the stop cuts on the back side of the spoon. So having a straight edge to your blade will help mitigate that risk. It's also nice to get one that can lock into two different positions, but we'll cover that more when we get into the axe work. The other thing you're going to need is a club, and I make my clubs out of, this is about 14 inches, but 16 inches would be ideal. You don't want to go shorter than this, because you lose a lot of your mass when you have a shorter piece that you're swinging. And so having that extra, just those extra 2 inches or so, makes a big difference in how much force is coming down. Sometimes you use your club. You don't want to make it enormous, though, because sometimes you use your club very delicately, just to tap quite gently. And so about this size. This is obviously chewed down some from being used quite a bit, but it's helpful to have it come right where two branches are forking off, because then the grain is all swirled together and it doesn't want to break apart as easily. And I find it super important to have it sawed off at the end, and that way it can stand upright. And I actually have a little bench that's right here that I both sit on when I'm drawing my shapes, and it helps hold the club up at the right height so that I don't have to bend over. And so when I have a piece of wood that's like this, and my axe is like this, all lined up where I want it to be, I just have the club in my hand immediately without having to bend over and lose where this is. So that's my basic setup for axing. I'll do another video that talks about what tools I have and how to use them safely. Oh, let's talk about axe safety now while we're at it. The main thing about axe safety is to make sure that the edge never goes up above your hand that's holding the piece of wood. So I use the club quite a bit for these moments. When the piece of wood falls like that, there's a human tendency to try and grab it But if you're holding the axe in one hand, you got to be aware that you don't want to, A, drop the axe, or jam the axe into your leg in rushing to try and catch this thing. So let it fall. You can always pick it up later. And then when it comes to how I do my axe work, first of all, you'll notice that I'm choked up on the axe. I'm not holding it back here because you have way less control. And I'm also not holding it here because you want a certain amount of power. So this is sort of middle ground where you have a good bit of power, but you have a total control over what's going on. My axe is sharp, but it's not as sharp as my knives. I find that having a slightly dull axe actually works better because then it comes free of each cut quite easily. And doesn't get stuck. Let's see. And then the most important thing is to just make sure that your fingers are always back out of the way. The axe is the way that you're going to really mess your body up the fastest and the most. So when you're pressing down on the top piece of wood, use the base of your thumb or use your tip of your thumb and have your fingers tucked up or held back like this. And I always use a billet where I can abandon this top 3 or 4 inches of wood and have the spoon start down here. And that 3 or 4 inches of wood in part needs to be cut off because there's a big crack there. So I need to keep the spoon away from that anyways, but it also just helps keep my hand safe. So when you're axing, the axe doesn't need to be, you don't need to be wailing away on it. In fact, if you are wailing away, it's probably a sign that there's a better way to do it, a safer way to do it. And in general, you want to keep your axing gentle and have it be about hitting the same spot over and over again rather than have it be about the force with which you hit the wood. And you can see that my axing is nice and slow, right? If you find yourself going tap, 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 not only are you going to exhaust yourself, but you're also not going to be as careful about where each axe blow falls. So nice, gentle axing. And you'll notice as I get further and further away from myself, which also corresponds with the wood being wider and wider, my axe blows are getting stronger. But when I'm up here near my hand, I'm being super gentle. And you can see the axe edge is actually not coming up above my hand there. So moderate the axe blow so that it matches the needs of the moment. And don't do more than you need to do. And like I said, good axing is about chasing a line down rather than hitting something with so much force that it does exactly what you want it to do on the first try. So, what else about axing that I should cover now? That's about it. Just, give yourself space from your fingers. Make sure you're choked up on the handle. The axing is about waggling your wrist. You're going to have better results if it's a waggle and not a push with your elbow. So it's a waggle, and then you can be pretty gentle. And what you want is for the axe to bite in each time. So you'll see how the goal is to have the piece of wood tipped in such a way and braced against the uneven surface of the stump that the axe can be in a very neutral, natural position by my side here. And then notice that my fingers are held back out of the way, tucked out of the way, and then I'm working my way down in bits. You will almost never see me doing blows like this, where I'm holding way back on the axe. It might feel macho and manly and great, but it's super dangerous. So just be mindful of how you use the axe. It's the easiest way that you can really mess up your body doing this.